Access denied. Access denied.
Maintenance line. Access granted.
You can begin to get the smell of this if you're courageous enough, if you go into your own neighborhood and talk to probably even some of your own friends and ask them about the end times. The end times, right? Oh, there's going to be a war in the Middle East. It says so in the Bible. Whoa, God says that the Jews are going to go back to Palestine. They're going to have a war with the Arabs, and that will bring on the end of the world. That's good, because God prophesies that in the Bible, and that's God's will. That's true if God is the same thing as Lord Palmerston. So that if you see somebody believing that, or telling you that they read about that in the Bible, you have to know enough and be self-confident enough to try to get that person either some sympathetic attention from a professional person, which is yourself, or else at least don't try to get involved in a crazy conversation with them, because they're reciting British propaganda. Geopolitics, that's what's called geopolitics. In other words, the religion that's gotten into American Protestants, heavily in the black community, heavily among Baptists, and of course, it's a certain heart idea of Zionism, right? Is British geopolitics. First one who proposed that the Jews need to go back to Palestine was Lord Palmerston, the British foreign minister and later prime minister. In 1840, he sent a letter to the British ambassador in Turkey. Palestine at that time was part of the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire. And Lord Palmerston said, the Jews as a nation desire to return to Palestine. And of course, as Abba Ibn pointed out, the Jews didn't know anything about that at the time. The British then sent troops a month later for the first time and landed them in Palestine. They didn't take it over at that time, but they started to, get involved. Now, after the Civil War, the British set up a very strange organization called the Palestine Exploration Fund. It was set up by Queen Victoria and by the United Grand Lodge of Masons and other people supporting Masonic ideas. What do? They went to Palestine, which didn't belong to Britain, it was part of the Turkish Empire, and they started to dig in the city of Jerusalem. Dig for ancient temples. Dig for any ruins that might be put to a certain use by the British Empire. The Masons talk about restoring the Temple of Solomon, and this is what Meir Kahane and some of these crackpots of the extreme wing in Israel talk about. We got to restore the Temple of Solomon. And then your so-called fundamentalists over here will say, yes, once that's restored, then we can have our end of the world. Right? End times. Oh boy. Why do they want to restore Solomon's temple? That wasn't the last temple. There were 3 temples. The last time it got closed down was the 3rd temple, not Solomon. Solomon's was the 2nd. Why do they want to restore Solomon's temple? Because I think it might have to do with the fact that Solomon had more than God in his temple. He also had a few pagan gods in there, right? Read about that. Whatever it is, these guys from Britain went over there in the 1860s, 1870s, and dug way down. The leader of this, the head of the Palestine Exploration Fund, was a man named Sir Charles Warren. who wrote a book about his experience as the lead. He was an engineer in Her Majesty's Army. Wrote a book called Underground Jerusalem. Another book called The Temple or the Tomb. And he published a book in the 1870s about proposing the colonization of that section of the Ottoman Empire that the British called Palestine, in exchange for taking over Turkey's national debt, right? And he said, let this be done with the avowed intention of gradually introducing the Jew, pure and simple, who is eventually to occupy and govern this country. It is written over and over again in the Word of God. Israel are to return to their own land. It's a British Army guy saying this, right? Okay, so now, who is this fellow? This is Charles Warren. He goes back to England. He takes a few trips to South Africa, spends a number of years killing the natives down there and shooting some of the Dutch people. And then he goes back in 1886 to London, and he starts a new Masonic organization, and it's called the Quatuor Coronati Lodge. We still have this here. Let's write this down for you specialists in the audience. Quatuor Coronati means the four crowned ones. This is a research lodge of the Freemasons, the British Freemasons. By the way, when I say Freemason, I mean British Freemasons, because as of this point in time in the world today, there's nothing but British Freemasonry. There's Prince Hall Black Freemasonry in America, which is very quiet and is intimidated by these other guys. But among white people on the whole planet, with a minor exception in France, don't say Freemasonry, say British Freemasonry, okay? It's British. Anyway, this is a special lodge they set up. This guy was the head of it. He had another job at the same time. He was police commissioner in London. And it just happened at that time that the royal family had a little problem. The grandson of the Queen married the wrong person, see? And they wanted to cover that up, and she was hustled off to an insane asylum, and all the witnesses were killed. Cut up with Masonic signs all over them. And they said, oh, it's a lone assassin named Jack the Ripper. And it was nice to have a police commissioner who's also the head of this lodge, Quatuor Coronati. Also, they had the assistant coroner who's in the same little group. And he lost his job because there was a big uproar about that, but so what? He helped the royal family out, you know. This lodge went on to do very interesting things. They produced some new groups in the world. You've heard about some of these groups. One group that they controlled was called the Theosophists. Another group that they controlled was called astrology. Astrology had been ended in Europe possibly hundreds of years before. There was some little bits of astrology that would float through France, etc., etc. But at least for 100 years, or much more than that, it was dead in France and Germany. And in the 1890s, the British reintroduced it into Germany and France. Why would they do that? Geopolitics. And these guys write about how they did it and how proud they are of introducing superstition into Europe. There was a group called the Order, capital O, Order of the Golden Dawn, that was organized by this little group in England, this research lodge, and who are the founders and promoters of Zionism also, right, in the sense of having actually undertaken this as a project. This group was later run by Aleister Crowley, who's a pretty famous Satanist who came to Hollywood and helped start Hollywood early in this century. There was another, these guys were running Freemasonic and various occultist things in Turkey to shake things up in Turkey and prepare the way for the Messiah? I doubt it. right? Prepare the way for British geopolitical games and to control the route to India and so forth, right? It's a very strategic area, Israel, right? Palestine, right between Europe, Asia, and Africa. So they had in Turkey all of these crazy false Muslim groups based on the Sufi tradition, run by the British. The B'nai B'rith was there in great depth, run by the British. There was a guy who went down there to Turkey from Germany and became involved with these British organizations, became a Turkish Freemason there and astrologer named Sabattendorf. I don't know if I've spelled it correctly, but he became famous later. He went back to Germany and founded another sub-order of this thing called the Tula Society, which is the people who taught Adolf Hitler about the occult. All run by the British. Houston Stewart Chamberlain was there living in southern Germany and promoting, he married Wagner's daughter and was promoting Nazism for the British. All right, so this is what they were doing. Now, the chief Zionist in the period right after this, before you actually got somebody doing something about Zionism, was a man named Lawrence Oliphant. Very strange man who was in and out of America as a spy for the British. And he wrote a letter to the Foreign Secretary of England. Now this will get you right to your neighbor's problem. The end times. This is what he said. He said that he's a spy. He's a professional spy. His uncle is head of the East India Company. He's a personal spy for Lord Palmerston and then for other British governments. He came here and helped the Confederacy to try to break up the United States. He was all over the world doing these various revolutions and stuff. So he wrote to the Foreign Minister of England. He said that we have to set up a Palestine Development Company as the precursor for a Jewish state. This guy's not Jewish, right? He's a British aristocrat. He says most of the immigrants will probably consist of oppressed Jews from Romania and the south of Russia. He's writing this in 1878. He says, financing of this will be easy. Quote, any amount of money can be raised upon it owing to the belief which people have that they would be fulfilling prophecy and bringing on the end of the world. I don't know why they are so anxious for the latter event, but it makes the commercial speculation easy, as it is a combination of the financial and sentimental elements which will, I think, ensure success. And you thought that was your religion or your neighbor's religion. You didn't realize that it was this cheap operation by a bunch of British lunatics, right? Who say God said it. Isn't that amazing? Because they attribute a mass murder plan to God. And people buy it all over the place. Okay, now, this, oh, by the way, this guy actually eventually moved to Palestine when he left a cult in upstate New York. He moved to Palestine, wrote books on why men and women should not have sexual relations, and eventually died of syphilis in Palestine.